What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to the SI Sooners podcast. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but today is International Podcast Day. Whatever that is. You know, I mean, it's cool. It's fine. Well, you guys are doing your part by listening to the SI Sooners podcast. We thank you for that. And if you're watching on my YouTube channel, we thank you for that as well. Anyway, is there anything, Parker, that doesn't have a day, national day, international day created for it? Last weekend was National Daughters Day. This weekend, it was National Sons Day. Last month, I think we had National Puppy Day, which I think they tell us is actually like 7 times a year. Listen, maybe I just try to spoil my kids too much, but in my house, pretty much every day is either Kids Day or Dog Day. Parker, I'm pretty sure there's a National Dryer Lint Day, a National Camera Tripod Day, a National Old Ticket Stub Day. Parker, what's your favorite day?
Well, I'll tell you what, John, it's interesting that you bring this up because back in my early collegiate days at OU, when I was anchoring the school's newscasts every Friday, my co-anchor and I would always, there's a website out there that lists every single national holiday, regardless of how absurd it is. So we would just go find the date on the calendar, and it would be like 3 or 4 different days on the exact same day. It would be like National Popcorn Day, National Hug a Friend Day, that kind of thing. But we would always just pick the most absurd holiday to use as the kicker for our newscasts. It was pretty entertaining.
Oh, man. Here we go. I'm John Hoover. I'm in Tulsa. He's Parker Thune. He's in Norman. Again, thanks for listening to the SI Sooners podcast, and thanks for watching the SI Sooners podcast over on YouTube. No matter what day it is, we appreciate it. Whatever success we're having is because of you guys, the listener, the viewer, and on our website, the reader. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate you guys. We do. Parker, I want to get into my story that I just posted like an hour ago at SI Sooners, allsooners.com. Check it out. Does trying to be both the offensive coordinator and the head coach actually detract from one's ability to do both jobs effectively? I asked Lincoln Riley that question on Tuesday, and he said he doesn't think so. He said whatever problems he's having on game days don't have anything to do with him actually trying to do both jobs. Okay. Just so we're clear, this is framed in the premise of yet another massive blown lead and yet another loss for Oklahoma. Shocking loss, 38-35 to Kansas State last Saturday in Norman. Lincoln Riley has 7 losses in his career now, Parker, and in 3 of those, he's had a huge lead. Twice, OU held that lead late in the game, late third quarter, early fourth quarter. And then in 2017, of course, the Georgia game in the playoff, the lead was just before halftime, it was 31-14. So 3 times in the last 3+ seasons, OU has gotten out to a big lead but failed to hold on to it and lost the game. Now, I mean, you add in the games where they had a big lead and blew it and still won, you're talking about 7 games out of 44 career games that Lincoln Riley has coached. Parker, I got on the SEC coaches teleconference today, and I asked a couple of guys who've really kind of made a name in their careers as both a head coach and an offensive coordinator. I asked Gus Malzahn, and I asked Mike Leach. Yeah, Lincoln Riley's mentor, Mike Leach. Both those guys said it was just too big, said it was too hard. Of course, Leach doesn't care. He goes against the grain. He's still going to do it even if it is too hard. He doesn't care. He just said he feels like the job is too small if he's only doing one or the other. But Malzahn, you know, he's given it a couple of chances. He's tried and given it up and tried again and given it up. Every time he goes to another offensive coordinator, he does play calling, and then he eventually hires someone else and gives it up. I also asked Philip Montgomery at Tulsa, who was really great in his first season, second season. But yeah, Tulsa has struggled quite a bit, and especially, Parker, when it comes to putting teams away in the fourth quarter. What are your thoughts on Lincoln Riley being maybe spread too thin?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thought, John, and I don't know that it's a one-size-fits-all type of thing. I think it's the kind of thing where you look at each individual coach/coordinator and say, okay, there are some guys that can handle this more so than others. There are some guys that are better suited for a dual role than others. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that every offensive-minded head coach is capable of calling his own plays, nor is it fair to say that every single offensive-minded head coach should subcontract the play-calling responsibilities to an actual offensive coordinator. I think it varies from team to team, from coach to coach. Now, I want to be clear, John, I don't believe this personally because of what I just stated, but I wonder if it's going to be a growing sentiment if the Sooners are to lose again at some point down the line, and there's inevitably going to be some level of dissatisfaction from the fan base associated with that. I wonder if it's going to be a growing sentiment that Lincoln Riley is better suited to be a coordinator than a head coach. Because I think there are certainly some coaches out there, and you look at former Oklahoma defensive coordinator Brent Venables is a perfect example. Brent Venables is arguably the best coordinator, offensive or defensive, in college football. He should never take a head coaching gig. He just shouldn't, because he does his job so well that he will always have job security, he will always have a top-of-the-line defense, and he will always have recruiting prowess as a defensive coordinator. Brent Venables is an example of a guy that is much better suited to be a coordinator than to be a head coach. Now, I think what you have in Lincoln Riley, you have a brilliant offensive mind. You have a youthful appearance, demeanor, and exuberance that he brings to the sideline. And I wonder if people will start to see that. They'll start to perceive the manner that Lincoln Riley has in his coaching style. And they'll begin to look at Oklahoma continually falling short of expectations. Not by much, but continually falling short of where they expect to be, which is competing for a national championship at the end of the season. If Oklahoma continues to pile up playoff failure after playoff failure, or, God forbid, the Sooners don't even win the Big 12 this year, I wonder if there's going to be a contingent of Sooner Nation that starts to assert that Lincoln Riley shouldn't have been promoted to head coach. And to be clear, like I said, John, I think Lincoln Riley is a fine head coach. I think he's the perfect coach for Oklahoma, and I don't believe that there's another head coach in the nation, save for maybe Nick Saban, that the Sooners would rather have. I think he is a tremendous leader. I think he's a tremendous person before any of the football stuff even comes into play. But he's also, as we know, a tremendous football coach. However, you always got the haters, right? You always have the extremists. They're saying, oh, we never should have brought this guy on in the first place. He was 33 years old, youngest head coach in the FBS. This was doomed from the start, which obviously isn't true. And to be honest with you, John, 100+ collegiate programs across the country would kill to be in the kind of position that Lincoln Riley is in and that the University of Oklahoma is in. But that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And I'm wondering if given everything that's transpired over the last week and given the continual narrative here that the Sooners seem to take the foot off the gas, I wonder if that becomes a more prevalent topic of discussion.
Yeah, you know what? I'm with you. I think he is a tremendous head coach. I think he's got his finger on the pulse of the team like few other head coaches in the country can do. I really do. I think he's connected to those guys in a way that an older coach, a more savvy coach, a more experienced coach, a wiser coach, if you will, people like a Nick Saban, an older guy, would have, I think. Listen, I think Nick Saban's the best of all time. I'm not trying to knock Nick Saban here, but you mentioned him, so I just think he would connect at a different level than what Lincoln Riley connects with. Now, does that produce championships? At Alabama, it does. At Oklahoma, so far, it does not. But I also think he's a tremendous offensive coordinator. I think he's an unbelievable play caller. I want you guys to read that story. AllSooners.com is where you can find it because it breaks down the breakdowns, but it also includes perspective from the guys who are in the business of being the head coach and the offensive coordinator, the guys who have tried it and won, guys who have tried it and will not won, and guys who have tried it and said, nah, you know what? It's just too big for me. I think some of Oklahoma's late game meltdowns can be attributed to Lincoln Riley, potentially. I'm just asking the question, not pointing the finger. I'm asking the question. Potentially being stretched too thin. Like I wrote in the story. Lincoln makes it look easy, but it's not easy. There comes times in games where your attention as a head coach is required for certain, I don't know, it's like a bandwidth problem. It's like your attention is required over here to know the timeout situation, or to know how much time's left on the clock, or to know the opposing team's timeout situation, or to know, have a feel for their momentum. Maybe the other team is gaining momentum offensively, or they're doing something defensively that you're not seeing because you're busy being a head coach or you're busy being the offensive coordinator. It's like Leach said, Mike Leach said, the job is too big. Now, he didn't say it's too big for Lincoln, and he didn't say it's too big for him. He just said it's too big. Parker, I want to ask you about Alex Grinch in just a minute, but real quick, what else stood out to you from Lincoln Riley's press conference on Tuesday?
Well, I think much like we saw from Grinch in the aftermath of Saturday's game, as well as his presser today, I think you saw Lincoln Riley take a great deal of responsibility for the way that things played out. And I will say, John, he stood by his decisions, which I thought was interesting. I mean, on a certain level, you have to kind of expect that from a head coach. Very rarely do you see a head coach come out and say, I screwed up, or I made the wrong call there, especially in those real controversial moments. But his decision to punt the ball with less than 3 minutes to play, we talked about that on the last installment of our podcast. Lincoln came out and said, hey, I believe in that call. I think that was the right decision. I was aware of everything that was going on at the time, and there were several factors that played into that decision, but he wasn't willing to back down from it. And in terms of taking the foot off the gas, that was something that he had to answer to over and over and over again. And I think the message from Riley and from Grinch to the media in the aftermath of that loss is the exact same. And I think you hear it from the players too. It's, hey, this is on all of us. We can't afford, none of us can afford to take the foot off the gas. None of us can afford to let up. The thing you keep hearing, John, over and over, is that the Sooners players and coaches are emphasizing we need to come out and play 60 minutes of football. Not 40, not 45. We need to come out and play 60 minutes of even keel, level-headed football in order to win and to be where we want to be as a program. And so that's the challenge for the Sooners moving forward.
Maybe there's some stuff going on where he gets a little conservative in the second half of ball games where they have a big lead, because he's also the head coach and the offensive coordinator. I'm just saying, an offensive coordinator who's not the head coach might not get conservative with some of those plays, but because there's so much at stake for the head coach, maybe his play calling becomes a little more conservative. Just saying, these things are all connected. You were on the call today with Alex Grinch, the whole call, I should say. I had to jump off, jump on, jump off, jump on to talk to Leach and Malzahn over in the SEC. But what did you take away from Grinch's Zoom call today?
Yeah, well, Grinch has faced a lot of criticism about his defensive philosophy over the last few days because people look at the way the Kansas State game turned out, see that the Wildcats generated 4 turnovers, and that Grinch's Speed D, which prides itself on turnovers, didn't generate a single one. And through 2 games, the Sooners only have 1 takeaway on the defensive side of the football, and that was an absolute duck that Jaden Johnson threw that Delarian Turner-Yell had to camp under like a center fielder. So I don't know that the Sooners defense has even really generated a single takeaway yet this season. And that's a concern because as much as Alex Grinch has hammered that home with his players and publicly with the media saying, hey, we're out to get 26 takeaways a season, it's obviously concerning that the takeaways aren't coming. And my biggest concern, John, and my biggest issue with Grinch standing by the philosophy, and, obviously I have no issue with a guy standing up for what he believes in and his mentality as a coach. But where and how do those turnovers occur? Turnovers are so random, John. It's not something that I think you can necessarily pursue as a goal. I think it's a byproduct of solid fundamental defense. And so I'm beginning to wonder, as I think a lot of people are, if Grinch is shooting the moon here and he's trying too hard to go after something that's not plausible and not even possible, really, because there's just that element of randomness to being able to create turnovers on the defensive side of the football. And you look at what brought Kansas State back in that game on Saturday. It was poor coverage. It was poor tackling. Those are the things that need to get shored up before Alex Grinch starts worrying about generating turnovers. And the most memorable thing he said today, John, was, when you're hitting singles, he made a baseball analogy. He said, when you're hitting singles and you're giving up home runs, you got to hit a lot of singles. And that's Alex Grinch's way of saying we got to combat big plays with big plays. We can't afford to be hitting singles. Well, John, my counter to that would be, why not just don't give up home runs? Sell out to stop the big play. Don't let the big play happen, and then you won't have to worry about winning a game with a bunch of singles and giving up a couple home runs along the way.
Pitching wins ball games. That's what I know about baseball. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, we're going to take a good look at Iowa State. Hey, are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman or a car dealership in Oklahoma City or a restaurant in Edmond, or maybe you're a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise and you just want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Well, then consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day, and the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or DM us on Twitter at all_Sooners. Okay, let's do some social media real quick. Follow SI Sooners on Twitter at all_Sooners. Find Parker, of course, at Parker Thune. I'm at John E. Hoover. Parker's on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. You know where to find us by now. Our website is allsooners.com. And if you haven't been there, we've got this really cool community section. I've talked about it before. It's like a message board. And the messages were off the charts. Some of them were not nice. So, like I said, I think on Sunday, busiest day we've ever had in the community section. There's lots of people over there, guys, who think a lot like you do in terms of the Oklahoma Sooners football program, and you should probably jump in there. Jump in there, sound off. It's free. Don't forget, it's free. And I went through the YouTube channel today, John Hoover Media, and I had to delete some comments from the users, from the viewers. They were not kind, and many of them had profanity. I try to disallow profanity on my comments. I will block them. I will remove them. I will delete them. But those are free too, and they are on fire. So get in there, allsooners.com or my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media, and let us know what you think. Okay, Parker, let's talk about Iowa State. We know, I think, most of the particulars at this point. Brock Purdy is the quarterback. He's a junior. Seems to me like he's poised to have a really good year. He has been very good each of his first two seasons, but I think this year could be special for Purdy. Did you know he's 12-5 against Big 12 opponents at this stage of his career? Meaning no other Iowa State quarterback in the history of that program has ever won 12 games against the conference opponents that he's playing in. The kid can play. You've got Breece Hall, the outstanding sophomore running back who hit TCU. Yeah, Gary Patterson's stingy, no run zone, TCU defense. That TCU defense hit them for like 150 yards and 3 touchdowns last week. He's been over 100 yards from scrimmage in 9 of his last 10 games. And of course, we know Charlie Kohler from Norman. To me, the kid makes a case for one of the top tight ends in the country. They did have to retool the offensive line a little bit this year. They've had some injuries up there. They've had some COVID stuff up there, just like everyone else has. But Parker, this Iowa State offense, as they showed against TCU last week, looks dangerous to me. Of their 423 total yards last week against TCU, 249 came on just 5 plays. Big play offense out of Iowa State. 75-yard touchdown by Breece Hall. 49-yard touchdown by Kini Nwangu. A 49-yard pass from Brock Purdy to Landon Akers. A 44-yard pass from Purdy to Joe Skates. And then Hall finished it off, Parker, with a 32-yard touchdown run. These guys are good. I'm telling you, these guys are good. What do you think?
Well, John, I was just chastising Alex Grinch at the end of last segment. Now I'm going to present a challenge to him. Hey, guess what? You just got burned several times in the late stages of the game by a team that didn't have phenomenal skill position players, and it led to a loss. Guess what? Iowa State does have phenomenal skill position players. So don't give up home runs this week, because if you do, it's going to hurt. And trust me, it's not going to take nearly as long for Iowa State to put points on the board as Kansas State did this last week. Iowa State will come out all cylinders firing, ready to come at you, ready to kick you while you're down. The Sooners haven't lost back-to-back regular season games, John, since 1999. Iowa State has beaten Oklahoma twice since 1961. How fun would it be for them to bring the Sooners into their place and send them off with another monumental upset loss? This team's going to be hungry, and Matt Campbell knows how to coach. Brock Purdy's a fantastic quarterback. Breece Hall is one of the most talented skill position players in the country, not just the Big 12, I would argue. So, if you're talking about counteracting home runs with singles, I think the focus should be, as we touched on last segment, John, the focus should be on your pitching. The focus should be on that defensive side of the football, making sure that you don't get burned for big plays down the field. Because chunk gains against a team like Iowa State, the Cyclones can come in there and rack up chunk gain after chunk gain on you. Things are not going to go well on Saturday night in Ames. And trust me, there will be a lot less room for error against a team like Iowa State as there was on Saturday against Kansas State. And you couldn't even take advantage of the margin for error then. How much less so are you going to be able to take advantage of the margin for error, what little margin that exists on the road against as solid a football team as Iowa State?
What I saw from Kansas State on Saturday was a 28-point underdog that got real fearless when the chips were down. It would be a less monumental upset if Iowa State won. They're only, I checked this morning, an 8-point underdog. So here's the bad news. The Iowa State defense is better than the Iowa State offense. They're led by Jaquan Bailey, the Big 12 defensive end, all Big 12 defensive end, who had 3.5 quarterback sacks last week against TCU and set the school career record. The guy's that good. He's the best defensive lineman in the Big 12, Parker. You've got Mike Rose is a great linebacker. They're outstanding in my eyes in the secondary. This is a game Oklahoma's going to have a hard time winning this game. Not going to say that. I'm not saying they're not going to win it. I'm saying they are not going to have it easy in any way, shape, or form, Parker, especially with that Iowa State defense.
Yeah, certainly. And it's going to be real interesting to see which Oklahoma we get out of the gate, John. Because if they start sluggish, I tell you what, Iowa State isn't going to do what Baylor did last year and let you sneak back into the game. Matt Campbell is too good a coach to let that happen. So Oklahoma's going to have to come out and they're going to have to put it on the Cyclones early. And they did that against Kansas State. And when we talked prior to the game last week, John, I was saying, hey, Oklahoma jumps out to an early lead, it's over because Kansas State isn't built to play from behind. Well, guess what? Oklahoma blew a big lead to a team that wasn't built to play from behind. The margin is that much smaller, again, John, this week against Iowa State. And Brock Purdy is a fantastic quarterback, much, much more physically gifted than Skylar Thompson. And you mentioned Jaquan Bailey. These are high-end players. Iowa State has some dudes. And it's going to be real interesting to see, especially with how weak the Oklahoma offensive line was last week against the Wildcats, how they counteract Jaquan Bailey, how they manage to slide their protections in order to make sure that he doesn't put pressure on Spencer Rattler and that Rattler is able to operate from a clean pocket. But no, John, this team is very solid on both sides of the football. And it's not going to be a 55-52 affair. It's not going to be a 13-10 type of a contest either. Iowa State's going to score points, and they're going to let Oklahoma score a few, but they're not going to let them go for 50 or 60. I can promise you that. This will be a well-contested game between two really good football teams, and the Sooners can't afford to make mistakes. I think that's what it comes down to. What cost Oklahoma the game more than anything last week was the 4 turnovers. You can't have a -4 turnover differential and expect to win a football game. You can't. It doesn't matter how gifted you are versus the other team. It doesn't matter how good your chemistry is compared to the other team. If you turn the ball over 4 times and the other team plays turnover-free football for 60 minutes, you will lose.
You know, you're right, of course. But if I think Oklahoma wins that game with a -4 turnover ratio, if they don't give up 77 and 78-yard pass plays on back-to-back possessions. I think they win with they have certainly a chance to win, a great chance to win, if they give up the 77 and 78 and go 0-4 in the turnover ratio and don't get a punt blocked. It was literally a cavalcade of errors. It was a cavalcade of catastrophes. I like stringing long C words together, I guess. I don't know. Parker, I've always said that Matt Campbell's team tackles better than any other team in the Big 12 Conference. And I think with the occasional exception of TCU, I think they cover better than any other team in the Big 12. John Heacock is the defensive coordinator and does a tremendous job, but the fact of the matter is this team has Matt Campbell's DNA, his fingerprints all over it. I guess that's why they're 10-1 in the month of October under Campbell, and why Lincoln Riley talked this week, Parker, about how much he respects Matt Campbell. They have had some tussles in their head-to-head meetings, 3 years. OU is 2-1 with a +4 point differential, Parker.
Yep, that's right. And one of the things that we don't necessarily give enough recognition to, John, is the fact that a lot of these real blue-collar Big 12 schools that don't have that same tradition of excellence that Oklahoma does, like Iowa State, like Kansas State, they can't recruit as well as the Sooners. They just can't. And so what they have to rely on to win football games is solid fundamentals. So yes, Iowa State's not going to miss tackles on Saturday night. They will play sound football for 60 minutes because that's the kind of a team, that's the kind of an attitude, that's the kind of a mentality that Matt Campbell has to cultivate in order to produce a contender at Iowa State, and he's done a tremendous job of it. So if Oklahoma's looking to go into Ames and get the game handed to them, that's not going to happen. They're going to have to go out there and win a football game. And, we heard it from the defensive captain, Pat Fields, in the aftermath of the Kansas State game. In the first half against Kansas State, Oklahoma was playing in attack mode. In the second half, they were playing to defend the lead. They're going to have to be in attack mode all 60 minutes because you can't be tentative against a team like Iowa State that is built, that is designed to take advantage of the mistakes that you make and play sound, fundamental blue-collar football for 60 minutes, horn to horn.
Yeah, you're right. Listen, Iowa State looked pretty badass last week. I think we all agree. But what happened against Louisiana in the opener? They lost 31-14 and looked really bad. Shaky offense, shaky defense, and they gave up a kickoff return and a punt return for a touchdown with special teams. Missed a bunch of tackles. I mean, COVID strikes again, I guess. They were not ready to play that game. Up next on the SI Sooners podcast, it's your segment, the SI Sooners Mailbag, and I promise you, it's a good one.
Hey there, loyal listeners. Parker Thune here with SI Sooners. Are you a business owner looking to get your product out there to the masses? Let's say you run a hotel in Norman, or a car dealership in Oklahoma City, or a restaurant in Edmond, or maybe you're just a small online business who creates and sells OU merchandise, and you want Sooner Nation to come sample your wares. Consider advertising in this space right here on the SI Sooners podcast. SI Sooners reaches thousands of readers, viewers, and listeners literally every day, and the SI Sooners podcast is the ideal place to find your next customer. To advertise, send an email to allsoonersi@gmail.com or send us a direct message on Twitter at @all_Sooners.
Final segment of the SI Sooners podcast. Okay, Parker, let's jump right in, man. It's the SI Sooners podcast Mailbag, and this is where you, the listener, or over on YouTube, the viewer, you get equal time. It's an election year, so you get equal time. You can exercise your right to tweet. All that good stuff. Right here on the Twitters. Just hit me up at John E. Hoover. Hit Parker Thune up at Parker Thune, Thune. Man, I don't know how much of the debate you watched last night, but I fell asleep shortly after Biden told Trump, shut up, man. What a weird debate. Anyway, Parker, we're going to do this rapid fire. First up, Mike D on Twitter asks, Kansas State played two deep safeties most of the game, and OU still couldn't run the ball. What? What'd you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, according to all the metrics, it was one of the worst rushing performances over the course of a game in Lincoln Riley's tenure at Oklahoma on Saturday. And I don't know exactly what to chalk that up to at this point. I think it's a little too early to make a definitive read on how scheme and how play calling has impacted the Sooners' ability to run the ball through two games. I got to see them against Iowa State and maybe the next week against Texas before I render a judgment on how Oklahoma's play calling differs from last year and whether or not that's impacting their performance on the ground. But I think they need to utilize Spencer Rattler's legs more. We saw how mobile he was on Saturday for the first time. We saw flashes of that athleticism. And is he going to rush for 1,300 yards this year like Jalen Hurts did last year? No, probably not. But he can be a threat in the ground game, and being able to have him, swinging on out of the backfield alongside a guy like TJ Pledger or Seth McGowan running that zone read, that can be an asset to the Sooners. And I'd like to see that get utilized a little bit more.
I'll just add real quick, Parker. Gabe Eichert on Twitter this week broke down some video of the Sooners running backs in one-on-one situations with the safeties. 3 times they got taken down one-on-one with no resistance. The running backs have to be better. That's my contribution.
Yep.
Go ahead.
All right, well, this one comes courtesy of Nathan. I'm going to try to translate this into proper English here. If Rattler doesn't do well this Saturday, do you think Lincoln Riley would replace Spencer Rattler, and who would he turn to, Tanner Mordecai or Chandler Morris?
He would turn to Caleb Williams. How about that? Neither of those scenarios is going to happen. Chandler Morris is not the backup. He's not ready to play at this level yet. The backup is Tanner Mordecai. He's not as good as Spencer Rattler. Spencer Rattler started the game last week, 23 out of 25. Had the two picks. One of them was a bad throw. Come on. We're not ready to go there yet with Spencer Rattler. Did he go 4 of 12 in the fourth quarter with an interception? Yeah, he did. Hell yeah. But that's a growing thing. That's a thing where a young quarterback making his first career Big 12 start has got to learn, okay, here's what I'm not supposed to do. Here's what I'm supposed to do. Two different things. I think he's going to learn those things quickly. Parker, here's one from BK on Twitter. Why does Lincoln get conservative before he builds after he builds the lead? Needs to keep his foot on the gas. Could it be because he's the offensive coordinator and the head coach?
Well, I feel like we've answered this one already, John. I feel like we've spent plenty of time over the last 2 or 3 podcasts talking about this particular phenomenon. And frankly, I would hope that the loss against Kansas State quashes whatever embers of tentativeness that Lincoln Riley has about playing pedal to the metal in late game situations. Hopefully this is the straw that breaks the camel's back and we start to see the Sooners step on teams' throats when they get into the late third, fourth quarter type of situations with a lead like that. Because if we see the Sooners, as highly regarded a team as they are, if we see them blow another lead like that, that's going to be real cause for concern in Norman. All right. Let's see, John. Let's see what we've got for you. This one's from Jason. Offensive line personnel changes? Defensive back changes? Is there an answer to the running game woes? So you got a 3-in-1 question there, John.
3-in-1. Jason, you're pushing the limits there. I've got the depth chart right here. I'm going to try and go over some of the names. No, there won't be any changes on the offensive line. I don't see any. I think you'll see Anton Harrison start the game at left tackle. He finished the game at left tackle. I think he came in the third series last week and finished the game. I thought he was fine. I watched the game mostly through binoculars, and I will zero in on guys, especially the young guys. I'll zero in on them as much as I can while still trying to comprehend what's going on the field. And I thought, from what I saw of him, which was about, 7 or 8 plays close up, isolated through the binoculars, I thought he was really good. I didn't see any mistakes. I thought his footwork was good. I thought his hands were strong, powerful, had good punch. He had an awareness of his own base, how wide his own base is and what his abilities are. So I think Anton Harrison will start at left tackle, and I think that's going to be it up front. Marquise Hayes, you might see some movement with Marquise Hayes. I thought he was good for the most part, but there were some times when he could have been much better. Defensive backs, I'm afraid what you see is what you get. Those are the 5 best Oklahoma defensive backs that Alex Grinch and Roy Manning have to offer. That's it. That's why it's one of the reasons why Delarian Turner-Yell and Pat Fields played so many snaps at safety last year, because they didn't have anybody else. But and then the running game. I go with Parker on that. I think you're going to see more quarterback run game this week. Lincoln Riley knows he's got to win this game. So forget the whole, hey, need to keep my quarterback safe, need to keep him upright, need to keep him from getting hit. I think you're going to see an element of the run game added this week, and that is Spencer Rattler. Parker, one of my most loyal readers, going back to my radio days for sure, and maybe even my newspaper days, is Brett Crawford. He asks, which side of the ball needs this game and presumably a victory more? The offense isn't used to struggling, but the defense is in year 2 and needs a massive improvement. What say you?
I'd say the defense needs it more, John. I think the offense, for all the flack that we gave Rattler for his 3 turnovers last week, the offense played pretty well. The offense played decidedly above average, and they're getting contributions from all over the place, especially from those true freshmen, Seth McGowan and Marvin Mims. That's really encouraging for me to see. The defense has a long way to go, and I think everyone acknowledges that. And I think the expectation in year 2 was that the Speed D was going to take another leap. We haven't seen it yet. Well, I would say we saw an inkling of it against Missouri State, but that was Missouri State, and the Sooners should have held Kansas State to far fewer points than they did. That Wildcats team had no business putting up 38 on the Sooners. So I believe the defense needs it a lot more this week. Okay, here we go. This is an interesting one, John. This comes courtesy of Jeremy. I'm 42. If I live another 25 to 30 years, will OU win another national championship?
Jeremy, I think you're good. I think you're going to have another national championship sometime in the next 25 to 30 years. I say that knowing full well that it has been 20 years since the last one. 20 years, which is the longest in the history of the school since they won their first one in 1950. So it might be close. But no, I think Oklahoma and I think Lincoln Riley are in for a national championship. They got to turn around some things in recruiting. They've got to continue on the path, maybe I should say, that they started in recruiting. They get a few more Caleb Williamses at other positions, of course. They get a few more number one players at their positions like they have in this 2021 recruiting class. I think good things are in store for Oklahoma. Parker, simple and to the point from Travis. Any changes to the defensive depth chart?
This is an interesting one. I think it's too early. I think it's still a week too early to pull the trigger on any major personnel changes. I think if we see an individual player have a weak performance against Iowa State this week, missed tackles, things like that, I think this Iowa State game is going to be the tipping point for the defense, and then you start to look at making some changes. But right now, you want to give these guys the benefit of the doubt even after an egregiously poor fourth quarter against Kansas State. You want to give them the benefit of the doubt right now. You believe in the 11 guys that you sent out there for a reason. They prove they're worthy of that starting gig in preseason camp. So I'm riding it out for one more week with the guys you got on the field before I think about making any changes if I'm Alex Grinch. Okay, you're up, John. We're going to jump ahead to Randy, who says, I haven't bought into this until recently, but has the weak Big 12 made us think OU is elite when they are in fact not that good?
Yeah, this one I think requires a little bit more layered, more nuanced answer. Yeah, I think there's something to that. I'm not going to say they're not that good. I am going to say they're not on the level that LSU was last year or Clemson. You know the score. So yeah, they're missing. There's an elite tier of teams, and then there's like a second tier of teams that includes Georgia and Oklahoma and teams like that. Can they get out of it? Are they good enough to climb up to that next tier? Yeah, like I said to the previous question, probably in the next 25 to 30 years. But I think part of the problem is, unfortunately, it's the Big 12's not very good. The Big 12, when everybody started throwing the football in the Big 12 and everybody abandoned defense and everybody did it all at the same time, about 2007, 2008, 2009, and everybody got off of playing line of scrimmage football, that's when the Big 12's chances of winning the national championship really diminished. You saw the Big 12 in the national championship hunt every year from 1998 to about 2009. And then when OU started that 2011 season, and they were unanimous number one, consensus number one, and they had that ESPN All Access show, and everybody was running around with their sharks and their defensive backs where I thought they were the best in the country. Ever since then, it has been a rough go for the Big 12 Conference. So I think you're onto something. I do think Oklahoma has separated itself, however, from the rest of the Big 12. Parker at the Sooner asks about the reverse on the first play, the throwback to Rattler. I thought this was a question going to be about how come he's so clever and creative and daring early in the game, but what he's asking is it reckless to run those plays early, and does it send a message of weakness, or I assume he means desperation early in the game?
No, not at all. And we talked about this on Sunday. I love the fact that Lincoln Riley was dipping into the bag of tricks earlier in the game, and I wish he would continue to do that for 4 quarters and get creative with his play calls, because that's where I think you see the Sooners have some phenomenal success and get some chunk gains. Listen, I have no issue with Lincoln Riley going outside the box with his play calling. I think when you get out of that zone read mold, that intermediate passing game that seems to be the theme on offense for Oklahoma, and you get some reverses going, you get some jet sweeps, you get some movement, some play action, you throw the ball to the quarterback. Jalen Hurts had a couple catches last year. I really like to see that because it's something that not a lot of coaches these days are willing to do. A lot of these guys play very conservative football. And look, the thing about Lincoln Riley is, at least in the first half, he's aggressive. I want to see him be aggressive for 60 minutes. I want to see the Sooners be aggressive for 60 minutes. And if that's what it takes to kind of catalyze that aggressiveness, by all means, do that. I have no issue with it. In fact, I want to see more of it. Okay, John, last question for you. This one comes from Tyson, who says, do you think the lack of turnovers from the defense is due to the lack of pressure OU is getting on the quarterback? I feel like teams can force pressure only rushing 3 to 4, where it takes OU an extra 5th or 6th blitzer to cause havoc on the opposing quarterback.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think the reader, the listener right there is definitely onto something. Here's the deal. You're going to get a lot less turnovers in your life on defense if the quarterback is able to sit back there in the pocket and deliver the ball on time where he wants to, comfortably. Off of that, what happens when a offense can throw the football? They come back and they counter and they run the football. They run it when they want to. They throw it when they want to. Do you think guys are careless with the football or panicked or desperate with the football when everything's going great and they're comfortable? No, absolutely not. So Oklahoma, one way, Alex Grinch, if you're watching the SI Sooners podcast on my YouTube channel, one thing you might consider is really getting clever and creative with your pressures. Because if you can pressure the quarterback into doing something catastrophic, like, say, I don't know, Brock Purdy getting sacked and by 3 guys at once and throwing the football to a defensive back standing over there on the sideline, which is exactly what happened last week against TCU. That's how you create turnovers, is by pressuring the quarterback into doing something that he doesn't want to do. And then other guys, his teammates, tend to follow suit. We'll see. We'll see how that comes out. Last one for you, Parker. Gonzo Strangelove asks, is Grinch's obsession with turnovers causing a lack of focus on the basics? To this question, I said last year, I said, yes, they're pressing analysis, paralysis by analysis is what I called it. Maybe it's gotten worse this year, Parker?
Yeah, and again, I think it's too small of a sample size right now to judge it, John. I want to see how Grinch's defense responds against Iowa State on Saturday night. And I think you did see flashes of that on Saturday, where the Sooners seemed to be more concerned about going after the ball than they did about making the tackle, and it cost them. And they got a little too over-aggressive, and they strayed away from fundamental defensive football. And they got burned. They got burned repeatedly. And that's part of the reason why Kansas State was able to emerge victorious. And hopefully that's a blip and not a trend. And hopefully Grinch and his defense right the ship and come out strong on Saturday and are able to contain Breece Hall and put pressure on Brock Purdy. But I think that could definitely be a problem. I'm not willing to say definitively whether it is or isn't, at least for one more week. We'll see where we stand next week at this time.
We do hope to hear from Lincoln Riley again on Thursday. We'll see. It's possible. It's probably even probable. Don't forget to check out our next podcast on Sunday. I'm going to be in Ames. Parker's got to stay home, but I'm going to be in Ames, and I will be back Sunday morning, and I'm sure, guys, we're going to have plenty to talk about when I get back. Listen to the SI Sooners podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. Oh, and yeah, we're on Amazon now. If you have an Amazon-enabled device, just say, Alexa, play the SI Sooners podcast. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool, I got to say. Or just go to our website, allsooners.com, and click on the player. Listen either on your phone, your tablet, or your computer. And do not forget to check out the video version of what you're listening to right now over on my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. For Parker Thune, I'm John Hoover. See you guys.